about a grid for greatness? What does that look like? What are the principles, the key core components that help people to succeed wherever they're going to go? As I've been thinking about that lately, just this past week I read and listened to Angela Lee Duckworth. I don't know if that name rings a bell with you, but she has a fascinating TED Talk and other articles, and she talks about grit. She claims that we have actually missed it academically in judging everything by IQ or grade point averages. It's a terrible way, she says, to actually discern someone's ability to succeed. However, it's what we have, it's what we work with, but she says there's a better one. And after studying lots of people who succeeded, she traced their roots and found out that they were not actually top of the class in IQ, not actually top of the class in grade point average. That really was not a bearing on success. What she found was a huge bearing on success is what she calls grit. Just old-fashioned grit. And if you need a definition for that, it's just simply perseverance. It's stick-to-itiveness, just staying with it until the job gets done. Someone asked me years ago, how do you succeed in leading anything? I said, just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. It's just stay with it. Keep pushing, keep moving along. And there's probably no better springboard for a story like that than Solomon. And that's where this passage comes in. The scripture I gave to you is actually the words of God to Solomon in a dream. Solomon has now ascended the throne of his father David. That throne had tried to be hijacked by Absalom and then by Adonijah right at the very last minute. Finally, Absalom gets to the throne, and no sooner is he on the throne than Adonijah makes another play, another move to try to take the throne. And so Solomon has to endure a bloody purge of the kingdom before his throne is fully entrenched and established. But you see, Solomon has no stomach for war. He has no stomach for swinging swords. To my knowledge, there's no indication he ever held a sword in his hand, unless it's when he asked for the sword to cut the baby in half. But he was not a soldier. He was the white-handed scholar, the white-handed statesman, the soft-handed statesman. He was brilliant, intelligent, and wise. And now he steps into the throne of David, who was the renowned soldier, the man who brought peace to the country of Israel by the force of his sword. And bloodshed begins, and he feels his lack of experience so intensely. He's so overwhelmed by what God has asked him to do. And he has a dream. Have you ever been so overwhelmed that you took your problems to your dreams? I have. I've dreamed about my problems. In one situation, I remember, actually I got the answer in the dream. But it was just an amazing thing. I was so troubled about something that it came out in my dreams. And I was talking to Jesus in my dreams about a problem. Well, Solomon had the same experience. He was troubled. And while he was dreaming, here's what God said to him. 1 Kings chapter 3. I'm going to pick up with verse 6 rather than verse 4. Solomon says in his dream to God, "You've shown great kindness and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love and given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord, you have made your servant king in place of David, my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern your great people?" Then it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life, or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. I will give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before, and none like you shall rise after you. In this simple narrative that is given, the conversation between Solomon and God, there are four key components that serve as a grid for greatness. It's a grid for those who grasp life and understand how to mobilize and move forward and succeed. I want you to look at it in verse 7. Solomon had a right sense of history. The second thing was he had a real sense of destiny. Third, he had a rare sense of humility. And fourth, he had a remarkable sense of maturity. Let's look at that first one. What does history have to do with it? Well, Solomon was aware that God had already been at work in the lives of those before him. I wish I could take this class one by one or as a group and march you out to the Centenary Monument, just kind of walk you around that monument, let you read the bricks, let you look at some of those names. Sometimes in our youthfulness, each generation sort of feels like, well, we've got the answer. Nobody ever thought of this before. Obviously, nobody in the past could have been quite as brilliant as I am today. That's not necessarily arrogance. It's just simply a lack of experience. I've often found myself saying my predecessors had no idea what I'm grappling with. How could they understand? It was a different day, a different world, a different paradigm, a different set of technological challenges and cultural challenges. How could they know? But they had their own set of problems that I have no way of knowing or even understanding and probably couldn't even cope with. What I do need to understand is that God has already been at work. And I am standing on someone else's shoulders. There's much to do. But before I can do it, I really need a good understanding of what's gone before me. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you come from. I can't tell you how important identity is. The first thing Solomon does in his cry to God is he looks to the past and said, you were faithful to my father David. You worked in his life. You established the kingdom under him. You gave him rest from all his enemies. He understood that. He got it. Something had happened prior to him. Something important had happened. If you try to live without memory of the past, if you try to disconnect yourself from the past, you will actually dehumanize and depersonize yourself. You don't, without memory, you wouldn't recognize your family. You wouldn't know your ancestors. You wouldn't know your own house. You wouldn't remember how to say your prayers. Everything has content and context. And the world you live in right now has a context, and you need to know it. And that context has gone before. One of the problems with our country today is we've actually forgotten who we are. I'm not interested in veering off into politics, but I am interested in saying this: our country has a constitution. That's a very important document, but it also has a history of being founded on a philosophical paradigm of the Judeo-Christian ethic. I'm not here to argue that all the founding fathers were saved and sanctified. I'm not here to try to turn them all into evangelical Christians, but I am not going to forget their thorough commitment to a worldview that included a creator God, an intelligent being who put things into place, who had absolute truth. The importance of the role of religion in the Bible. But we live in a world who's absolutely forgotten that. And when you forget that, you lose your identity. When you have no identity, you have no context, no bearing, which to make choices and decisions. Some of you are going to step out into churches that desperately need some change. The tendency is going to be to take a wide swath, just get the scissors and start cutting, pull out the sword and sever everything. That's a dangerous move. G.K. Chesterton said, don't move a fence until you first find out why it was put there. Change is a necessary part of the world we live in. But don't forget this. Wrong almost always champions change. Change is good. Change is important. Change has to happen. But make sure you discern the difference between what is necessary, appropriate, needful change, and what may be moving a crucial boundary or touchstone that should not be moved. He had a great appreciation of the past. He had a real sense of destiny. I found it interesting that Duckworth in her remarks said that the people that she studied, whether they succeeded in winning the National Spelling Bee or became an astronaut or a successful doctor, whatever it was, that each one of them had a sense of passion. They had passion. And passion flows out of purpose. Solomon said to God, you made me king. He understood he had a role given by God. That is absolutely crucial. I remember walking through those doors right over there almost over 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago. First person I met jumped up and said, why in the world would they elect you president? You don't know any rich people. That was my introduction to my installation service. He made a valid point, at least as the world thinks and works. But I knew, as sure as I knew what my name was, God had set me into this place. I'll never forget living in that mobile home on the Pell City campground, sitting in those two recliners, Ruth and I, early one morning in prayer. And she turned and looked at me and she said, that's where we're going. And that was actually before they even voted on us. We knew, she knew, I knew in our hearts. There was a sense of purpose, destiny. Solomon understood the providential hand of God in his life. Life wasn't just a lucky throw of the cosmic dice. You're going to meet those that say, well, that's a nice career, that's a nice career, just whichever one makes the most money, flip the coin, take it. Just whatever door simple happens to open in front of you. I believe God has purpose for each of us. I believe He stamps it on the hard drive of our heart. I believe He wants us to find that purpose and then live by that purpose. Mordecai, I saw it in Esther when he said, who knows, but what you have ascended to the throne for such a time as this. And she had. William Wilberforce, the Englishman that actually led the fight to blot out slavery, who fought for 38 years to make it happen, felt that God had raised him up to not only abolish the slave trade, but reform the manners of England. William Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, he said, the Salvation Army was born when the poor of London got on my heart. Eric Liddell, the famous star of the movie, the book, but the missionary to China, the athlete who could run, he said this, he said, God made me for a purpose. He made me for China, but He also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure. I don't know if God's made you fast or maybe slow, made you bright, made you dull, made you gifted with words or a stutterer, gifted with logistics, math, computers, I don't know. But God made you for a purpose. He made you for a purpose. And somewhere you need to find that purpose so you can feel His pleasure as it soars through your very being. An interesting quote I found from James Smith in his book, You Are What You Love. He said, really, we are defined primarily by what we desire, not by what we know. Our wants are at the core of our identity. They're the wellspring for action. Passion. Willard said it like this: we live from the heart. That's where we live from. And when life isn't lived from the heart, it becomes a very, very dull existence. We live from the heart. Life gets organized around those passions. The heart is both a driving engine and a compass. Make sure your heart is right with God. Third, he had a sense of humility. He told God, he said, I'm just a little child. I don't know how to go out and I don't know how to come in. Well, what a beautiful spirit. Paul said it like this: who's sufficient for these things? Who can handle this? Who can do this? Humility is not just groveling in a self-despising spirit, but humility is the right estimation of ourselves. Someone has said humility is radical self-awareness. I get it. I understand what I am. I understand my limitations. But I also understand the God that enables me and empowers me to do what He's called me to do. It was Willard that said, if you want to learn humility, I had no idea that there were steps to grow humility. It sounded not very humble to say I'm gaining in my humility. But Willard said the way to grow humility is threefold. He said, number one, don't pretend. Get pretense out of your life. Be transparent, be open, be real, be honest with every aspect of your life. Get rid of pretense. Pretense and arrogance are kissing cousins. He said, don't push. You know what? We live in a world that values shoving and pushing highly. We do. You got to push your way to the top. Just watch the political, just watch this crazy campaign that's going on in front of us. Name calling, belittling, pushing, shoving. That's what's gotten people to the top. You see, that works. And at the same time, this dichotomy of thinking that says, oh, I have to do this to win, but that's really not the kind of person I am. How stupid can you be? Obviously extremely stupid, and still get high in the world. But from a biblical framework, you don't push. You're not shoving. You're not pushing. I mentioned in a chapel sermon recently that David never shoved himself to the throne. He was out tending sheep, and after they'd scoured all the other brothers and he still wasn't around, God said, send, get him, and then bring him in. God was not going to overlook David, and He won't overlook you. You don't have to push and shove to get where you need to go. God will place you providentially where you need to be. Don't pretend, don't push, and don't presume. Never assume or presume anybody owes you anything. You deserve anything special. Don't go there. But lastly, Solomon had a remarkable sense of maturity. He said, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. Solomon asked for an understanding heart. If I understand it correctly, that word in the Hebrew means hearing, a hearing heart. And to the Old Testament Jew, hearing meant the equivalent of obeying. He wanted an obedient heart. Not just to sit and pass judgment on people, but to obey and do what he knew God wanted him to do. So it seems to me that if you want to have wisdom and discernment, it begins with an obedient heart. A heart that is humble and discerning begins with full obedience to God. It enables you to grasp and comprehend what is obscure. If you want that trait, then start obeying God right now. Have full obedience in your life. You're going to be tested. Can you imagine being tested with what Solomon was tested? Solomon's first test was two harlots brought in a baby, and one said it's hers, the other said it's mine. They said, "Judge between us." You know the story. Solomon said, "Okay, bring me a sword, get the baby, cut her in half, part to this one, the other half to that one." He knew the true mother would rally and say, "No, no, 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 she can have the baby," to spare the child's life. You know that story. Now, you probably won't be confronted with dividing up babies, but you're going to be confronted with some unbelievable challenges. How can we cope with those? I've been listening as the United States now has filed suit against North Carolina. North Carolina's filed suit against the United States. The United States has filed suit against North Carolina over the transgender restroom. North Carolina says you'll use the restroom that's on your birth certificate. You'll go to that gender. Whatever gender's on your birth certificate, it's the gender restroom you're going to use. The federal government says, "No way. We are an open, all-embracing, tolerant society." And now it's going to be fought out in court. The only problem with that, every time you go to the court and you appeal to the Constitution, it generally always comes down on the side of quote-unquote fairness. So more than likely, I would predict North Carolina will lose. But the governor can say in all his political expediency, "See, I fought it out in court, so," and then he can continue to take federal money and on and on and on. Here we go, life moves on. A lot of it's just a political charade. But you're going to face some real issues. I've already had the discussion with our administrative committee. What's going to happen the day someone walks up this ramp, I don't know if it's male or female, and they're bringing an animal with them, and they're telling me that's their husband, or that dog is their husband, or that dog is their wife, and they wish to cohabitate and live together in the couple's norm. That'll come. That's coming. Sure as I'm standing here, somebody's going to face it. We're going to be tried, we're going to be tested with all kinds of weird issues that are coming. They'll take institutions like ours, they'll finally find us, they'll figure us out, and they'll target us to make a test case eventually. You say that's not possible. Well, yeah, it is. GE already found us. Years ago, GE found us. Somebody found us on the website and said we stood against homosexuality, and GE said, "We're dropping you from our matching gift program. We don't support institutions that do this." After a lot of letter writing and feuding and fighting with them, they did get us back on. But it's coming. That's just a little bump of the devil's wing. The real blow's going to come, and it's going to come, and you're going to face it. You're going to face it in your churches, in your Christian day schools. And I'm telling you, everybody who rolls up their sleeves and thinks they can duke all this stuff out in court and appeal to the Constitution consistently loses. And if I'm wrong on that, I stand to be corrected, but I don't think I'm wrong. They always lose on that one. So what is the solution? The solution is for you and I to be fully obedient in order that we can be truly wise and mature, and so that God will help us navigate the troubled waters that are coming. And the truth is, there's nothing new to the church, quite frankly. Just go back to Corinth if you want to. Go back to Greek society and Roman society. Not a lot of what we're seeing new. It's just the same old stuff dressed in a different outfit and coming back around. But the church moved through that. And the church had great success and great victory and great revival and great power. But they didn't turn to politics to solve their problems. They turned to the God of heaven, who has ultimate wisdom. But you and I must be humble in our own sight, truly obedient unto the Lord, for Him to give us that kind of maturity and wisdom to work our way through these challenges. The closing words of David to Solomon are the words I'm going to close with this morning. I give these to all of you, but particularly to our senior class. 1 Chronicles 28:20. Then David continued and said to Solomon, "Be strong." That's grit. That's Avery's translation. Have grit. Get some grit. Be courageous. Have passionate grit. And do the work. I love that last little phrase. It's almost like David tacked it on after an afterthought, but he didn't. You often read the Bible says, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Here he said, be strong and courageous and act. Do the work. Roll up your sleeves and get the job done, because you are the people to do it. We are right side up people living in an upside down world, and we're the folks to turn an upside down world right side up. And so you can do it. By the grace of God, you can do it. Let's stand.